In November 1928, 3 people crossed the Atlantic aboard the Ile-de-France. Joseph Kennedy was already wealthy and ambitious. Beside him stood Rose, his wife and mother of 8 children. Near them was Gloria Swanson, the celebrated actress who had become Joseph's lover. Swanson later remembered Rose as composed, courteous, and impossibly warm. No public confrontation disturbed her manner. Yet Rose had every reason to understand the arrangement. The mystery is not whether she knew, but what knowing required her to become. She remained married to Joseph for nearly 55 years. She endured his absences, affairs, and devastating family losses. She also helped create a household where painful truths could disappear. Why did Rose accept this marriage, and who ultimately paid for her silence? Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald was born in Boston on the 22nd of July, 1890. The city measured status through neighborhood, religion, ancestry, and access. Irish Catholics filled parish halls and democratic wards across working-class Boston. Protestant families still controlled many banks, universities, clubs, and drawing rooms. Rose's father, John Francis Fitzgerald, learned to turn exclusion into political power. Known as Honey Fitz, he sang at celebrations and cultivated fierce loyalty. Boston elected him mayor in 1906, when Rose was still a teenager. His daughter became part of the public image surrounding his success. She appeared beside him at political events and received guests in the family home. Those experiences taught Rose poise, memory, performance, and the value of appearances. They also gave her an early view of power. Yet that education stopped wherever her father's authority began. Rose hoped to attend Wellesley College, an institution associated with ambitious, educated women. Her father instead placed her in Catholic schools, following advice from church authorities. She studied at Manhattanville and later traveled to convent schools in Europe. The decision was presented as protection, faith, and proper preparation. It also delivered a lasting message. Men could admire Rose's intelligence without surrendering control. She was trained for public usefulness, but not personal independence. Discipline was treated as virtue, and obedience as proof of character. Suffering quietly carried moral value within the religious culture surrounding her. Rose met Joseph Patrick Kennedy during summer holidays at Old Orchard Beach in Maine. Their families shared Irish Catholic roots, democratic politics, and formidable ambition. However, Honey Fitz considered the young man unsuitable for his daughter. Joseph's father also commanded a political organization that competed with Fitzgerald interests. The opposition lasted for years and shaped the entire courtship. Distance, chaperones, schooling, and European travel repeatedly separated the couple. Joseph continued writing and continued advancing through Boston's financial world. By his mid-20s, he had acquired the status of a remarkably young bank president. That achievement changed the calculation surrounding him. A determined suitor with financial power appeared different from an ambitious rival's son. Rose and Joseph married on the 7th of October, 1914. The ceremony was modest, held in the private chapel of Archbishop William O'Connell. Rose had defied her father long enough to marry the man she chose, but her victory contained an irony she could not yet see. Honey Fitz had tried to separate her from Joseph while teaching her lifelong submission. When the marriage became unbearable, that lesson would matter more than his earlier warnings. The newlyweds settled at 83 Beale Street in Brookline, outside Boston. Joseph Patrick Kennedy Jr. arrived in 1915. John, known within the family as Jack, followed in 1917. Rosemary was born in September 1918 during the deadly influenza pandemic. Later, accounts offered competing explanations for Rosemary's developmental disabilities, including events surrounding her delivery. No single dramatic birth story should be treated as a proven medical cause. What is clear is that Rosemary developed differently from her siblings. In a family increasingly organized around competition, that difference became dangerous. Kathleen, called Kick, arrived in 1920, followed by Eunice the next year. Patricia came in 1924, Robert in 1925, and Jean in 1928. Edward, known as Ted, completed the family in 1932. Rose bore 9 children across less than 18 years. Joseph's world expanded just as Rose's physical world became narrower. He moved through banking, shipbuilding, investments, and eventually the motion picture industry. Each success increased the family fortune and extended his absences. Rose remained within a nursery that seemed to grow before she recovered from childbirth. Materially, she lived with privileges unavailable to most mothers of her generation. There were household employees, comfortable homes, travel, and excellent medical access. Those advantages mattered, especially during years of pregnancy and childhood illness. But money could not create partnership where Joseph offered management, provision, and distance. Childhood illness repeatedly disrupted the nursery. Jack suffered serious health problems, while Rosemary required increasing attention. Rose answered uncertainty by measuring food, sleep, medicine, progress, and conduct. The instinct that later filled index cards began as an attempt to make an unpredictable household manageable. Rose began treating motherhood as a profession, demanding constant measurement and improvement. Her children were not merely raised, they were prepared for achievement. Health, manners, reading, religion, sports, and public conduct became categories of performance. This work gave Rose purpose, but it also turned intimacy into administration. Joseph pursued wealth with the concentration Rose brought to religious practice. Business allowed him to remain absent while still appearing to fulfill paternal duty. He sent instructions, provided opportunities, and imagined futures for his sons. Rose absorbed the daily repetition, exhaustion, and emotional disorder left behind. From outside, the Kennedys appeared extraordinarily fortunate. Inside, prosperity concealed a marriage in which responsibility and companionship had separated. The marriage already contained everything necessary for a quiet collapse. Joseph possessed money, mobility, and the freedom granted to powerful men. Rose possessed children, faith, social position, and no accepted language for refusing. Before the Kennedy name became nationally admired, she made one attempt to escape it. While heavily pregnant with her 4th child, Kathleen, Rose returned to her parents' home. She left her 3 young children in the care of household staff. Later accounts describe her as exhausted and uncertain whether she could continue. It was an extraordinary decision for a Catholic mayor's daughter near 1920. No reliable transcript preserves the conversation that followed. Family retellings say Rose's father reminded her that divorce was not an option. After approximately 3 weeks, he told her to return to her husband. Whether every remembered phrase is exact, the result is not disputed. Honey Fitz had spent years arguing that Joseph was the wrong man. When Rose finally reached the same conclusion, her father offered no sanctuary. His religious and social rules outweighed his earlier distrust. She could choose a husband once, but she could not choose again. Returning should not be mistaken for a fully independent choice. Rose risked religious belonging, parental support, social standing, and possibly daily access to her children. Wealth gave her comfort, but the family fortune remained under Joseph's command. Every accepted institution around her pointed toward the same door. Rose returned before Kathleen's birth and never made another recorded attempt to leave. 5 additional children followed Kathleen, bringing the eventual number to 9. The family grew larger, wealthier, and more publicly impressive. The lesson was unmistakable. Endurance would be rewarded, while departure would be treated as failure. This was not necessarily surrender in the simplest sense. Rose began constructing a life that depended less upon Joseph's affection. She placed emotional weight upon ritual, travel, schedules, children, and God. A woman could remain beside her husband while withdrawing from him almost completely. That kind of separation leaves no legal document and requires no public announcement. It happens internally, after disrespect becomes too familiar to challenge. Several viewers recognize the pattern from their own lives. The marriage continues in photographs, while the relationship has already ended in private. Joseph entered the film business during the prosperous 1920s. In 1927, he met Gloria Swanson, among Hollywood's most recognizable stars. Their connection combined finance, production, ambition, and sex. Joseph advised her business affairs and became involved in films made through Gloria Productions. Both Joseph and Swanson were married. Their affair was hardly protected by convincing secrecy among people surrounding them. The arrangement reached its most memorable expression during the Atlantic crossing of 1928. Rose traveled in the company of the woman sharing her husband's private life. By then, Rose had 8 children waiting within the family structure Joseph financed. Public anger could humiliate Swanson, but it could also expose Rose herself. Departure threatened religion, children, status, and the identity she had spent years building. Silence preserved those things, although it could not preserve a conventional marriage. Swanson's later recollection described Rose's unfailing courtesy during the voyage. She struggled to decide whether that behavior came from sanctity, foolishness, or superior acting. Each possibility assumes something different about Rose. None can be proven simply by studying her smile in a photograph. Perhaps endurance held spiritual meaning. Perhaps she refused to react before observers. Some viewers suspect Joseph's affairs relieved demands she no longer welcomed. Rose left no confession confirming that interpretation. The strongest conclusion is narrower and more revealing. By 1928, Rose understood that confrontation would not transform Joseph. She had already tested the limits of family support and discovered their boundaries. Composure became less an invitation to forgive than a refusal to perform her injury publicly. Gloria left Joseph's intimate life, but infidelity continued. Later, biographers connected him with other women over subsequent decades. Documentation varies between individual allegations, yet the broad pattern is well established. Several Kennedy sons later became associated with similar behavior in their marriages. It is tempting to treat that pattern as simple inheritance from father to son. Human behavior rarely moves so neatly across generations. Yet children learn what power permits by watching what a family refuses to name. Rose never publicly challenged that lesson. Instead, she secured her own jurisdiction inside the household. Joseph could control capital, careers, and political planning. Rose would control religious formation, domestic records, and standards imposed upon the children. Their marriage increasingly resembled parallel governments occupying the same estate. It would also shape how her children understood marriage. Rose attended Mass with extraordinary consistency throughout her adult life. She walked to church in bad weather and organized travel around religious observance. Her faith cannot be dismissed as a decorative excuse for remaining married. It gave her identity, order, companionship, and a framework capable of containing pain. That faith had been formed within conservative Irish Catholic culture before Vatican II. Divorce carried profound religious and social consequences, especially for a prominent mother. It did not automatically produce excommunication in the simplified manner sometimes claimed. Still, separation and remarriage could threaten Rose's sacramental life, community, and sense of salvation. The obligations were also enforced unevenly. Rose was expected to preserve the marriage regardless of humiliation. Joseph's adultery violated Catholic teaching, but society rarely imposed comparable consequences upon powerful husbands. As one audience response observed, the Church's visible demands appeared to fall mainly upon Rose. Beginning in the 1920s, she took extended trips to Europe without Joseph. She visited Paris, Rome, shops, churches, and friends before returning to the family. Biographer Barbara Perry proposed that absence may have functioned as church-compatible birth control. Rose never documented such an intention, so it remains interpretation rather than fact. The trips unquestionably created distance from pregnancy, domestic routine, and Joseph himself. At home, Rose built order through written records. Index cards tracked each child's weight, illness, appointments, vaccinations, and clothing needs. The system demonstrated care, memory, and remarkable organizational discipline. It could also feel impersonal. Corrections and instructions were sometimes written on paper and attached to a child's clothing. A spoken conversation became a memorandum, and emotion became another item requiring control. The children received attention, but not always the warmth they needed from it. Rose also expected the children to report achievements and failures with unusual precision. Family life became a permanent examination, rewarding discipline while exposing weakness. In a dynasty preparing itself for public greatness, even private emotions could feel like evidence entered into a record that no child could escape. By the 1930s, Rose and Joseph maintained separate bedrooms across their homes. The physical arrangement gave architectural form to their emotional separation. Their children later said they rarely heard their parents exchange angry words. That may indicate peace, but anger requires enough intimacy for confrontation. Rose had found a way to keep functioning. Prayer absorbed fear, travel created distance, and schedules prevented disorder from spreading. Yet, a coping system can protect its creator while injuring everyone forced to live inside it. Rosemary would expose that moral limit more clearly than any affair. As a child, Rosemary learned more slowly than her brothers and sisters. She struggled academically and needed greater patience than a competitive household naturally supplied. Family efforts to educate and include her were real. So was the pressure created by comparison with siblings trained to excel. Rosemary grew into an affectionate young woman who enjoyed social activities, dancing, and family attention. She could write letters and participate in carefully managed settings. As she entered adulthood, however, her moods became harder for caregivers to control. Accounts describe anger, frustration, and nighttime departures from supervised schools. By 1941, Joseph had already designed political futures for his sons. He feared scandal and treated unpredictability as a threat requiring removal. Rosemary's behavior became a family problem, then a medical problem, then a reputational problem. She had little power within any of those definitions. Joseph consulted Walter Freeman and James Watts, physicians promoting a new brain operation. Lobotomy was presented as a modern treatment for varied psychiatric conditions. Many hospitals had not confronted its destructive potential. Professional approval gave dangerous experimentation an appearance of authority. In November 1941, Freeman and Watts operated on 23-year-old Rosemary. Joseph authorized the procedure. During the operation, surgeons cut neural connections within her frontal lobes. The result was not calm independence, but permanent and catastrophic disability. Rosemary lost much of her ability to speak clearly and move without assistance. She required help with basic physical needs and would depend upon institutional care thereafter. The operation did not restore her place within the family's ambitions. It removed her from the life those ambitions were designed to protect. How much Rose knew beforehand remains disputed. Rose later maintained that Joseph acted without informing her fully. Some biographers accept that account, emphasizing his dominance within the marriage. Others argue that Rose attended consultations and probably understood that doctors proposed a serious brain operation. The available record does not justify pretending that debate has been settled. Joseph's authorization is clear. Rose's exact knowledge is not. But uncertainty before the operation cannot explain everything afterward. Once Rosemary's condition became undeniable, both parents faced a different moral decision. Rosemary first lived at Craig House in New York. In 1949, she was moved to St. Coletta in Jefferson, Wisconsin. There, Catholic sisters and professional caregivers built a more stable life around her. The public received little truthful information about what had happened. Rose later told historian Doris Kearns Goodwin that she did not see Rosemary for about 20 years. At their eventual reunion, Rosemary reportedly recoiled before the relationship slowly improved. Other siblings renewed contact and became involved in her life. The family secret could not remain perfectly sealed forever. The most important question is therefore larger than prior knowledge. Why did the family member needing protection become the one most completely removed? Silence shielded Joseph's decision, the family image, and political possibilities. It did not shield Rosemary from loneliness, disability, or decades away from home. This is where Rose becomes harder to classify as a pure victim. Joseph had betrayed and controlled her for years. Yet suffering does not automatically prevent someone from participating in another person's abandonment. Rose could be powerless within her marriage and powerful in relation to her daughter. Audience reactions repeatedly return to that contradiction. Some see a mother carrying grief too terrible to discuss. Others see emotional repression turning into neglect. Both interpretations recognize the same painful reality. Rosemary bore consequences that the family's most powerful members avoided. The household practiced concealment with the regularity Rose brought to prayer. Unpleasant facts could be renamed, relocated, or removed from conversation. Soon, death itself would test that discipline. The Kennedy response would help create the public image of courage that later generations admired. On the 12th of August, 1944, Joseph Kennedy Jr. boarded an explosive-laden aircraft in England. The mission involved directing the unmanned bomber toward a German target after the crew escaped. The aircraft detonated before Joe Jr. could bail out. He was 29, and no recoverable body returned. Joseph Sr. had prepared his eldest son for political greatness. That future disappeared in the explosion, along with years of paternal expectation. Family memories describe Joseph collapsing into private grief. The man who could manipulate money and opportunity encountered a loss beyond negotiation. Accounts of Rose's reaction have often been simplified into a single command against crying. That attribution is unreliable. Ted Kennedy later remembered his father, Joseph, enforcing the household rule against tears. Other family recollections describe everyone crying when news of Joe Jr. arrived. Rose nevertheless became publicly identified with controlled grief. She attended Mass, maintained routine, and refused to make mourning a permanent spectacle. Some of that composure reflected conviction. Some reflected decades of training herself not to reveal injuries that could not be repaired. Only months before Joe Jr.'s death, Kathleen had married William Cavendish in England. Billy was heir to the Duke of Devonshire and belonged to a Protestant aristocratic family. Rose opposed the union on religious grounds and did not attend. Joe Jr. was the only Kennedy family member present. Billy died in Belgium in September 1944, only 4 months after the wedding. Kathleen was widowed at 24 and remained attached to England. She had already chosen a life outside the domestic system that shaped her siblings. Widowhood did not persuade her to surrender that independence. Several years later, Kathleen became involved with Peter Fitzwilliam, a Protestant earl who was married. He intended to pursue divorce, placing the relationship beyond Rose's religious boundaries. Family opposition grew intense, with money and belonging reportedly used as pressure. Joseph, more pragmatic than Rose, agreed to discuss the matter. Kathleen and Fitzwilliam traveled toward that conversation in May 1948. Their aircraft encountered severe weather and crashed near Saint-Beauzile in the Ardèche region of France. Everyone aboard died. Kathleen was 28 years old. Joseph attended her burial at Edensor in England. He was the only Kennedy family member standing at the funeral. Rose remained in the United States, with medical examinations given as the reason. Her absence became one of the most condemned decisions of her life. Later, writers sometimes interpreted Rose's response as belief in divine punishment. The evidence does not support presenting a cruel declaration as established fact. Her religious worldview certainly shaped her judgment of Kathleen's choices. Her private thoughts at the grave she did not visit remain beyond recovery. The deeper contradiction requires no invented quotation. Rose once sought refuge from a marriage and encountered a father enforcing Catholic duty. Years later, Kathleen sought freedom in love and encountered her mother enforcing similar boundaries. The controlled daughter had become an administrator of the same system. That does not mean Rose caused Kathleen's death. It means family pressure followed Kathleen until her final journey. Cause and moral consequence should not be confused with supernatural punishment. The tragedy lies in choices made before the storm, not in imagining heaven steering the aircraft. By 1948, Rose had lost 2 adult children in 4 years. Rosemary remained alive but separated from family life in an institution. Rose's answer was not public collapse. She tightened the routines that allowed her to continue functioning. The country later celebrated this behavior as heroic endurance. There was genuine strength in surviving losses that would overwhelm many people. Yet strength without emotional permission can become another family command. Children still feel grief even when a household refuses language for it. After Joe Jr.'s death, John inherited both the family's political expectations and its emotional discipline. In December 1961, power shifted inside the Kennedy marriage with brutal speed. Joseph played golf in Palm Beach before suffering a massive stroke. The attack paralyzed much of his body and caused severe aphasia. His speech became drastically restricted, though not necessarily limited to one repeated word. He survived for nearly 8 years and required extensive daily assistance. Nurses and relatives assumed much of that work. Rose preserved her mass schedule, golf, travel, and separate routines. She visited Joseph at designated times but did not become his principal bedside caregiver. Some observers later interpreted that distance as a quiet form of revenge. More sensational stories claim Rose delayed medical care when the stroke occurred. Reliable evidence does not establish those allegations, and they should remain labeled as gossip. Emotional distance alone does not prove an act of retaliation. It does, however, reveal the final condition of the marriage. Joseph depended upon women after decades of treating women as replaceable and controllable. Rose prayed for him without reorganizing her existence around his disability. She gave him duty, but apparently little recovered intimacy. The reversal attracted fascination because it looked like justice written into the body. Yet illness is not a moral verdict. Joseph's dependence mattered because it exposed the emptiness already existing between them, not because it balanced an invisible account. While Joseph sat unable to communicate freely, 2 more sons were taken violently. President John Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas in November 1963. Robert Kennedy was shot in Los Angeles in June 1968. Their father lived to watch the public rituals surrounding both deaths. Rose again appeared in black, attended religious services, and returned to routine. Americans saw a Catholic matriarch whose faith survived repeated catastrophe. That interpretation was not false, but it was incomplete. Her composure had been formed through losses, betrayals, and choices nobody outside the household fully understood. Joseph died at Hyannisport on the 18th of November, 1969. He and Rose had been married for slightly more than 55 years. Calling it a 60-year marriage captures its extraordinary length, but not the precise chronology. Much of that time had been spent in separate emotional worlds. After his death, Rose controlled her own account more completely. In 1974, she published a memoir titled Times to Remember. The book presented a close family repeatedly tested by Providence. Joseph appeared as a provider, a devoted father, and a husband who respected Rose's domestic authority. Publication also allowed Rose to fix the family story before outsiders assembled less flattering versions from interviews, memoirs, and archives of their own. The memoir did not literally erase Gloria Swanson from every page. Rose mentioned her as a visitor without acknowledging the affair. Neither did she entirely omit Rosemary's surgery. She used softened language about neurological disturbance and neurosurgery, avoiding the full truth of the lobotomy and its consequences. Those distinctions matter because concealment does not always require total silence. A name can appear while its meaning disappears. An operation can be mentioned while responsibility remains hidden. The most effective family mythology often contains enough truth to make its omissions difficult to see. Rose summarized her arrangement with Joseph through a revealing idea. He left her in peace to manage the children and household. Read generously, the statement describes trust and autonomy. Read differently, it records the settlement reached after. Love ceased functioning. Joseph received freedom, while Rose received jurisdiction. The family's public description of Rosemary also served political needs during an intolerant era. Americans often treated psychiatric illness and intellectual disability as hereditary shame. Careful terminology helped protect the Kennedy image from damaging speculation. It cannot be proven that one phrase rescued a presidency, but secrecy reduced political risk. Rose's memoir therefore deserves neither complete belief nor effortless dismissal. It recorded the version of life she had chosen to inhabit. That version may have been defensive, strategic, sincere, and incomplete simultaneously. People sometimes survive by repeating a story until it becomes emotionally necessary. In 2006, Rose's personal papers became available to researchers through the Kennedy Library. The collection included letters, journals, family material, and records accumulated over decades. Claims that exactly 300 boxes exposed a completely different woman are not securely supported. The actual documents offer a subtler correction. They reveal greater anxiety, loneliness, concern, and vulnerability than Rose's public serenity suggested. They do not simply reverse every sentence of her memoir. Instead, they show how much work maintaining serenity required. The matriarch and the abandoned wife existed within the same person. Biographers continue to divide over which Rose deserves emphasis. One interpretation sees a woman who survived by refusing to acknowledge unbearable facts. Another sees an active partner in building the Kennedy legend. A third emphasizes the patriarchal bargain separating Joseph's external power from Rose's domestic control. Each interpretation explains part of the evidence and leaves something unresolved. Calling Rose only a saint ignores Kathleen and Rosemary. Calling her only a monster ignores the religious, legal, and familial restrictions surrounding her. Calling her merely passive ignores the formidable system she built around 9 children. Eunice Kennedy Shriver eventually transformed part of the family's failure into public action. Her work helped establish the Special Olympics in 1968. Rosemary's experience informed Eunice's commitment to people with intellectual disabilities. Millions benefited from a response the earlier Kennedy household had been unable to imagine. Rose lived long enough to witness that movement expand internationally. She did not publicly connect its moral urgency to Joseph's decision or her own long absence. Rosemary later enjoyed renewed contact with several siblings and a more humane environment. Still, no charitable achievement could return the life taken from her in 1941. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy died at Hyannis Port on the 22nd of January, 1995. She was 104 years old. She had outlived Joe Jr., Kathleen, John, and Robert. Rosemary remained alive in Wisconsin until 2005. The Atlantic scene of 1928 now looks different. Rose's smile was neither ignorance nor proof of forgiveness. It belonged to a survival system built from faith, discipline, status, and withdrawal. That system kept her standing when nearly everything around her broke. It also protected Joseph's behavior and softened the truth about Rosemary. Silence preserved the marriage, but not intimacy. It preserved the family image, but not every family member. Rose survived the system, then sometimes enforced it upon her children. Rose Kennedy's legacy is more than endurance. It is a warning that silence can hold a family together after love vanishes. It can also decide who must disappear so the family may continue looking whole. What do you believe Rose's silence ultimately represented? Survival, complicity, or some painful combination of both? Share your judgment in the comments. If you value carefully researched stories about the private cost of power, please like this video and subscribe to Crown Secrets and Scandals. Thank you for watching, and join us again for another history hidden behind the public image.